and in our strategy and having a long-term focus. Most people think short-term. That is what catches them in a trap, is that we're only thinking about how do we try to build wealth in the short term, right? A lot of people want to press that easy button. That's not the case. When it comes to investing, we have to make sure that we have the long-term focus. A lot of times people don't understand the tax consequences around their investments. They wonder why they are getting, they're having to pay taxes, or their taxes are a little bit higher because of their investments. Trying to time the market. Trying to time the market, I will always say, is, time in the market will always beat timing the market. No one knows what's going to happen. That's your neighbor, that's your friend, that's myself. No one knows what's going to happen. That's why it's important in your financial world is to get the guidance around what is a good strategy for you and what investments to be in. So what is investing? Investing is making your money work for you. It is very different than savings. A lot of people will use they'll say savings as investing or vice versa. Savings is just cash. Is you putting money into a cash account. That is, again, from last week, is having that clarity, the organization, being the boss of your money, making sure that you have an emergency fund. But if we are looking at things for be an emergency fund or in the short term, that is savings. Investing is something very different. Investing is making your money work for you. Savings helps you to have liquidity. It helps you to have access to the liquidity, safety in the short term. But it burns a hole in your pocket. This is why we do not want to be a cash hoarder. This is why we don't want to keep it under the mattress, because it will burn a bigger and bigger hole under the mattress or in your pocket. That's where investing comes into it. But it involves risk. But not all risk is bad. It's being measured with your risk based around a few principles. We hear this term all the time. And you may not know exactly what it means, but so therefore, if we don't know what it means, we hear it, but it doesn't resonate with us. The power of compound growth means that your money can accelerate growth at a faster rate than you can earn it. So I'll say that again. Your money will grow fast at a faster rate than you can earn it. What I mean by that is that if you don't have your money working for you, no matter where you are in your financial journey, time is going to escape you. You cannot out-earn time. You can't out-earn your money working for you. So that is why investing and getting our feet into the investment game is important. This is where there is a wealth gap. Right? This is what accelerates and over the last year, we've seen more and more women take themselves out of the workforce, right? Because they've had to deal with the pandemic. That is only going to widen the wealth gap. So the more that as women, we can get our foot into the investment game and help to close that gap, this is where the power of compound growth. And when I say women, this is really for everyone, is that the fact that it's important to understand where you're putting your money and not being fearful of losing your money. Because when you're doing it right, it doesn't mean that you don't have risk, but it means that you don't need to panic if something goes awry, i.e. March 23rd of 2020, right? When COVID unexpectedly hit, and the market was at its lowest, which was 35%, we don't have to panic. So, but you have to make your money work for you. The 5 steps towards investing, to understand about investing. One, that kind of dovetails into the goal setting. Is my goal short-term, mid-term, or long-term? As I've said, something is short-term. Cash is really the only place to put money. because we don't want to lose that liquidity. We don't want to risk those dollars. But so if and I categorize short term as 0 to 2 years. So you want to have your emergency fund, but then you also want to have dollars that may be for a goal that's easily attained within the next year or two. That's where we want to keep it in cash. But beyond that, it is burning a hole in your mattress, your pocket, whatever analogy you want to visualize. So that's where your mid to long term fall into line when it comes to investing. Understand the risk and the reward. With risk comes reward. And this is where I think as women, we are fed that we are risk conservative. That is not the case. It's just that generally speaking, we are risk aware and we like to understand the pros and the cons and to have the information to be able to make a calculated decision. But it doesn't mean that we're not willing to take some risk. When you understand the principles relative to your own personal situation, investing is not as scary as it sometimes can feel. Being diversified, a lot of times, and I think especially now, is we hear a lot of talk around individual stocks, trying to pick the horse in the race, this whole thing that happened with GameStop and Reddit and all of these, chatter, whether that is through the internet, whether that's through the media, that is trying to pick the horse in the race. And we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive into that. But it's important to be diversified because when you're diversified, you are mitigating your risk. We just had the Kentucky, I'm a sports girl, so we just had the Kentucky Derby last weekend or this past weekend. We don't want to try to pick one horse in the race. That is diversification. Being disciplined. It is not sexy, it is not fun, it is not exciting. It is to build wealth takes patience, consistency, and discipline. It is boring. When it is boring, it means that it is good. The people that are trying to hit that home run and take the easy button, they are most likely going to lose out in some capacity. So being disciplined with your behavior and letting that momentum build, letting that progress build, no matter where you start, plant that seed, let that compound growth work for you and continue to nurture that. So the 5 questions I always ask clients and that we have to be thinking about when it comes to investing is why am I investing, right? What is your goal? You need to have clarity around your goals. If you don't have clarity around your goals, it's hard to put the right investment strategy in place. The caveat is it doesn't mean that you have to know exactly, right, word for word, how your life script's going to play out, but you need to have some sort of clarity to say, I want to buy a home. I want to start a family. I want to buy an investment property. I want to get married. I want to have kids. I want to put them through school. I want to have a retirement where I'm comfortable and I'm not afraid about living my money. Those are common things that I hear right now. Maybe you have other things, traveling, right? Maybe going on a 10-year wedding anniversary, maybe a 15, maybe a 20, maybe a 5-year. These are things that you have to think about in the context of your own life. What are the things that I want to achieve? And then it is what we can invest in. So based around the time horizon around that goal, there's different ways to invest. But most importantly, what's your appetite for risk? Every single one of us may have a different appetite for risk relative to the context of what our other parts of our financial plan looks like. What is the time horizon, right? What is the realistic time horizon to achieve this goal? So this way we can make sure that we're mitigating, that we're taking advantage of the compound growth, but we're also mitigating some of that risk. And how involved do you want to be in this day and age, right? Because of the boom of fintech, there's a bunch of apps, whether that is Betterment, whether that's Acorns. I tell people to stay away from the Robin Hoods that are not skilled in investing because I am not a fan of that app. But in the boom of the fintech, there are a lot of different apps that can help you if you want to do this yourself, or you can go to a professional to get that guidance. One of the top questions I get when it comes to investing, and I think this is something that we feel like we should have known in school, or is something that we should know at this juncture in our lives. That's not the case, even as fundamental as it may feel. Is the reality is it's a question I get from a lot of different people: is what is equity and what's fixed income? So when we're talking about the market is made up of 9 different asset classes. 7 of them fit within the equity position, and 2 of them fit within the fixed income position. When you hear about equity, we're talking about stocks, individual stocks from companies, whether they're large companies, maybe they're mid companies, or smaller companies. All it is about the capitalization of how big that company is. A Disney is much bigger than a Netflix. A Netflix is much bigger than just lost my train of thought on a smaller like tech company. But all of those companies, a mid cap, right? A Disney is bigger than I always use Bed Bath and Beyond as like my mid range for whatever reason. That's probably ages me, but as my mid range company. All of those are individual companies that are public trading companies that you can buy individual stocks. Doesn't mean that we always want to buy those individual stocks, but that's what equity is. The fixed income position is bonds, which it has an inverse relationship to the equities. So in your portfolio, when there's a lot of volatility in the equity position, the stocks are your airbag because there's that inverse relationship. And then there's cash. And what a bond is, cash is cash. We know what that is. But what bonds are is an IOU. So from that same company that you can buy as a shareholder to invest in that particular company, is that you can get an IOU. You can get it from a company, you can get it from a government agency, and depending on whether it's a corporate or whether it's a government or a municipal bond, is the taxation around it, right? So it's an IOU. That's why it's an airbag, is because it's going to garner you interest and income. Whereas your equities is that you're risking all the dollars that you as a shareholder are putting in. Now, investing into a Disney is a lot safer than investing in a smaller, newer company that just IPO'd. I will use for this is the one that just came to my mind when it just escaped me a minute ago, was Bumble, was that dating app that went IPO, right? It was the female led. It got a lot of press around it because it was the youngest female led IPO. And what that means is it just went public, right? So investing in a Disney or investing in a Bumble, there's a big difference. So to break that down even further, in the US, there is, and don't worry about all the small print on here, I'm going to run through. There are 3 asset classes, equity asset classes in the US: large cap, mid cap, small cap. Again, Disney is much bigger than a Bumble. Bumble fits within the small cap because all the dollars, one is the capitalization of the company, and most of the dollars that they are collecting from investors is going back into the company to grow. So they are not providing what's called a dividend back to their shareholders. An example of a mid cap is that Bed Bath and Beyond. Why I stick to Bed Bath and Beyond is just something that I always stick to. But again, in the US, those are the 3 asset classes. Us Americans, we tend to be selfish. And when I'm looking and evaluating people's portfolios, I see a high concentration of just US. We just saw beautiful, right? Beautiful lights and beautiful places in Denmark and Copenhagen and Spain. We are a global economy. If COVID didn't even teach us that even more, we should wake up and know that we are in a global economy. So it is important to not just have US-based investments in your portfolio. You need to also have international presence. In the international space, that is international developed, which is similar to a US large cap because of the stability. of the countries like the Japan, the Germany, the Great Britain, whereas international merging is similar to the volatility around a small cap because there isn't transparency in how they evaluate the markets. There's political and currency risk, the Chinas, the Portugal, Brazil. Then the last two equity positions is real estate and commodities, not real estate that we can buy, individual homes. It's investors pulling together dollars into a real estate fund, commodities, gold, silver. Then again, that makes up the equity position. And then there's the fixed income side. That's the airbag. Each of these asset classes have a different reaction to all the external factors that go on in the world, domestically, internationally, COVID-19, a presidential election in the US, right? Unfortunately, if there's a terrorist attack overseas, UK voting out of the European Union, the Union, right? So all of these things are things that we cannot control. So that is why, hopefully it's never for another pandemic in our lifetime, but COVID-19 was an unexpected market moving event, and it's not going to be the last one. So diversification, having the right mix of each of these asset classes, again, relative to the time horizon for your goal and how much risk do you want to take? Because the riskier, the more aggressive, when you hear that word being aggressive in your portfolio, it means that I have a larger portion of equities versus the bonds. Maybe 80 to 90% of my portfolio is in equities, where 10 to 20% is in the bonds. If we're more conservative, that number continues to go, the equity number goes down. So when we have the right mix of these 9 asset classes relative, is it something that is more of our midterm goal, maybe 7 to 10 years, 15 years, or is this for long-term into retirement? We have the ability to now kind of customize that strategy. But if something is shorter term than long-term, just by the nature of the time horizon around it, we don't want to be as aggressive as we could with the longer term. So it's important to be diversified and have presence in all of these 9 asset classes. This is, I'm just going to briefly go through it, is that's what this shows, is the fact that if we were trying to pick the horse in a race, and I know I'll make this a little bit bigger, but this is to really show you that if we were to pick the horse in the race, and which is what a lot of people do, because there's two emotions when it comes to investing: fear and greed. We only talk about the greed. Greed is when it's sitting at your dinner party. Now we can start to emerge from COVID, and we can start to be around people. Is when your friend tells you, "I'm making all this money, you should invest in this because I've hit the home run." Just because they hit the home run doesn't mean that you're going to hit the home run, and it's in the context of what fits you and what's best for you. Because I can promise you that your friend doesn't also say that they also lost money. I can promise you that they also won't tell you that they're panicking if something goes down and that they're selling. And so what happens in our investing life, because of the fear, is we try to pick the horse in the race, and then the horse isn't performing, so we sell. So we sell something when it's on sale, and then because of the greed, we buy something when it's not on sale. When we should be doing the opposite, is that when something is on sale, we should be buying it. And that's when something's at the bottom. And when something's on top is when we should be selling off. And when you have a diversified portfolio, it allows you to kind of play that game without the emotion, because you're committed to the long-term focus and not straying away from fundamentals. So this is just to show you, and then we're going to I'm going to pause and take some questions, and then kind of switch into the retirement piece. But the market, what this shows is that the market from 1926 to 2019, it's not updated for 2020 yet. But if you have a short term, this is why cash is king or queen for short term, right? For nothing more than a year or two, is because if we were to put money into the market and need it a year later, we have a 73% chance that it would be returned, that it would be returned back to us, right? So that means that we have a 27% chance that the market will be down, and that what we put in, it could be under, right? We could have lost it all, or it could be under. If we push it out to 5 years, looking at the market in 5-year increments, we're 87% right? So that means we have 13% chance that what we've put in may be under than what we've put in. So we could take a little bit more risk, because we have a 14% difference is big. So we can take a little bit more risk, but we don't want to be as aggressive as we can be if it's a 15 plus year, right? That's where it's 100% positive. So that's why it's important for you to think through what are your goals and have that clarity, because the reality is, whether it's an algorithm through a fintech, whether it's when all those fintechs, all they do is, it's an algorithm where you have to plug in what your goals are and what the time horizon is, and they tell you what portfolio to be in, or talking to someone. It is hard if there isn't clarity to say exactly how your portfolio should look and what to invest in if you don't have clarity, right? The awareness starts with you. That doesn't mean, again, that you have to know exactly how everything is going to play out, but again, you need to have that clarity. So I'm going to pause right here, and I'm going to start to take questions, because that's a lot of information in a short period of time. So if you guys want to start to drop things in the chat box, or feel free. It doesn't look like there's anything in the chat box on questions, so I will just open it up for questions. I will open it up for questions. So and I will say there shouldn't be, don't be shy. There isn't any judgment.
I'll start. There's a good one from Carol. Actually, let me read that one first. When you talk about long-term investing, what is the time frame?
Great question, Carol. I categorize long-term as 10 plus years. Okay. So the 4 main categories, when you want to think about where to put your money, there's 4 main categories. And those 4 categories is, 1 is short-term. That's 0 to 2 years. Okay. That is then from the 2 to 7, then I can categorize midterm. So number 2 is midterm. That's 2 to 7 years. The third one is long-term. That's 7 plus years. And then the fourth one I call is the 59 and a half bucket. That's your retirement, right? So the reason why I call it 59 and a half is because that's where a lot of the vehicles, and we'll go through this in the next segment, is the traditional retirement vehicles, the 401ks, the IRAs, things like that, where the government has rules and regulations, and they've put these vehicles in place for us to save for our future, because we're terrible at saving for our future. Investing, I should say, for our future. Those dollars you shouldn't be touching until you're 59 and a half. That doesn't mean that the dollars that you invest in the long term can't bleed into the retirement bucket. It means that you have accessibility to it before 59 and a half. But if it's long-term dollars, we could be aggressive in that portfolio. As aggressive as your own risk tolerance. That's not to say that I work with clients that, even though there's a long time frame, right, and their risk tolerance is not that high, and so we're kind of being a little bit more balanced between equities and bonds.
So your current chart here is really kind of showing the short term, the 1 year return, 1 to 2, the midterm, which is the 5 to 7, yep, and the 15 year, which would be the long-term investment.
Yeah,
all right.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yep. And we have to remember, when we were in the financial crisis, it seems like that's a blip in the road, right? And, I think for those of us that do remember that, have been impacted by that, at the end of the day, things have recovered from then, right? But we were in a 10 before COVID-19, we were in a good market for 10 years. Theoretically, the market is down 1 out of every 4 years. So
Right.
it doesn't, we don't know when the market's going to be down, right? We didn't know in January of 2020, no one was forecasting for COVID-19 to affect the markets the way that it did. That's why there's always going to be unexpected market moving events. And we just have to be prepared for it. And that's what a plan is. And when you are investing for the long term and have that long term focus, something like COVID-19 or another unexpected market moving event shouldn't phase you. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have concern. You can ask questions, right? But that doesn't mean, but when you, for every person that panicked in March of last year and took their money out of whether they were in retirement vehicles or non-retirement vehicles and took their money out of investments and put it into cash, they probably will never financially recover from doing so.
Yeah.
Because we also did not know that the market rebounded as fast as it did.
Yeah.
And there has
It
been,
just-
so
It's been a good year. Yeah.
it's been a good year. I mean, when I was looking at, even 2019 when I was, or 2020 when I was doing, client reviews and looking at their portfolios and just again in the context of your plan, like this was a good year compared to where we thought where we started. So but that fear factor sets in and people panicked and took their money out. They'll probably never financially recover from that.
Okay. Another good question. Is there a cap on how much you can invest in stocks like there is, or like there are with IRAs per year?
Great question. And I thought I had on here and I didn't put it on here. I'll kind of I'll give you my analogy of, of, I think it's actually in the retirement piece. But no, there isn't a cap. The reason why there's a cap with IRAs or 401ks is because the IRS has restrictions around it. They tell you how much you can put in. If you wanted to put $50,000 a year into your 401k, you cannot. You can only put 19,500 because that 19,500 is a deduction on your tax return. Right? So for and you don't pay taxes on those gains on a year-to-year basis. So the trade-off is the IRS says, Carol, I'm just going to pick on you, Carol, you can't put in as much as you want into the retirement account, but you can put $100,000. If you had sitting on $100,000 right now, you can go put that into, one individual stock if you want to really pick that horse in the race. Obviously, that is not my recommendation.
Not your recommendation?
In any sort of way. Never going to be the girl that's going to be your stock picker, but as you can put as much, you can put $100,000 into stocks. Now, the difference between stocks, bonds, and then there's this thing called a mutual fund or an EFT is buying the stocks and buying the bonds is going to the grocery store saying, hey, I want a piece of cake. And because I want a piece of cake, I'm going to the grocery store and I'm going to walk up and down the aisle and buy all the individual ingredients for that cake, for that piece of cake. But I can't just make myself one slice of cake, right? I have to make the entire cake. So I have to buy all the ingredients for that entire cake. I make that cake and I cut myself a slice of cake, right? So for that slice of cake was pretty expensive. I got all the ingredients I wanted, but it was pretty expensive to buy all those individual ingredients. I could have just gone to the bakery and bought that pre-made slice of cake. Going to the bakery and getting that pre-made slice of cake, I got all the same ingredients as I did going up and down the aisle, but I saved myself money. It was more cost effective for me to buy that one slice of cake at the bakery. Me going to the bakery and buying that pre-sliced piece of cake is a mutual fund.
Mm.
Because you can have all the ingredients, you can have the Amazons, you can have the Tessas, you can have the Netflix, you can have, the Bumbles. Now, what a mutual fund is that there's a fund manager that, based on the objective of the fund, maybe that fund is supposed to be super aggressive. Maybe that fund is supposed to be all in technology. You have a fund manager who's looking at all of the companies domestically and internationally that they can invest in. And based on, again, the objective of that fund, they're going to take a slice, right? They're going to decide, I'm going to go jump back here. They're going to decide how much of a percentage of large cap, how much a percentage of mid cap and small cap and so forth. They're going to have diversification. Some funds may only be all large cap.
Right.
And with that, or they may be all mid cap, or they may be all small cap. Maybe they don't have diversification. But there's thousands and thousands of different mutual funds. But if I wanted an all large cap fund and I wanted to invest only in large cap and I had a certain amount of dollars, me buying the mutual fund, a large cap fund, is a lot cheaper than me trying to buy the individual stocks, right? One share of Amazon is 3,500. So if I'm looking for diversification, I can only buy one share of, maybe buy one share of Apple. Maybe I have $10,000, right? The rule of thumb is typically in order to go to the grocery store and buy all those individual ingredients, by way of, in the financial world, stocks and bonds, if you have less than $1 million of investable assets, and that's obviously pretty high, it is hard to buy true diversification. And what an EFT is where a mutual fund, there's a fund manager, not Renee, but I'm going to use myself as the example, is I understand what I am, there's the objective of the fund, and I'm picking the holdings, I'm picking the ingredients by companies that should be in this fund. When you hear the S&P 500, that's the 500 largest companies domestically. You can buy a fund, which is called an EFT, it's just tracking the S&P 500. So there's no fund manager that's picking, should I have Tesla? Should I have, Amazon? Should I have some Bumble in here? All it is an S&P, it's an index fund that's tracking the S&P. So it's designed, there's no fund manager to pick which holdings to be in, because those holdings. So one isn't better than the other. The EFTs get a lot of a lot of people like EFTs these days because it's called passive investing. And because you don't have a fund manager, there's lower fees than having to pay the fund manager. I don't think one is better than the other. It depends on how much money you have and what your goals are. It really does depend, because with a lot of people think that EFTs can provide that diversification. Sometimes it doesn't. You got to buy that diversification, whereas mutual funds, you can get more diversification by one or two funds than you can with EFTs.
Ooh, thank you. Okay, Jenny asks, do you have any recommended news sources to look at when determining what stocks to invest in?
So I'm never going to be the stock picker for someone, right? So I'm not the trader that, is tracking, what prices of funds are or stocks are, and when to buy and when to sell it. That is not my specialty in any sort of way. That doesn't mean that I, don't have clients. I do it myself. I like to, I encourage at a low level. I always say, like, buy individuals, trying to pick the individual stocks or individual investing in that way is like going to Vegas. If you are willing to, invest dollars that you're willing to lose and say, hey, I'm going to have a fun weekend and I may or may not win. If I win, great, but I'm willing to lose these dollars. So you can learn your risk tolerance. You can learn how investing works. The CNBCs and, just even on their phone, right, is you can look at, the stocks and what the prices are. But, it really, you can look at the NASDAQ, you can look at you can look at Dow Jones. But I would just look at an overall view than I don't know, and frankly, I don't know all the sites that like traders go on. I would avoid the Reddit. I would avoid all of those things because that is what, gets people in trouble. So hopefully that helps. But I would just look at the stocks on your phone. You could always go to E-Trade. TD Ameritrade, they have some really good resources, but you obviously have to, invest at your own risk. And then when starting out, how much should I acquire between stocks and bonds? You mentioned one acts as a buffer. It really depends. When you're starting out, I'm always a proponent of buying mutual funds or EFTs when you're starting out, because you're going to get the diversification that you're good then buying the individual stocks. If you have some money sitting on the sideline that you're like, I'm willing to, lose these dollars, you can pick either company, whether it's established company or more of a risky, smaller, newer company, whatever it may be, to buy stocks. But generally speaking, when you're starting out, I'm a proponent of EFTs and mutual funds. And again, it's really a matter of if it's shorter term or longer term. If your goal is to buy a house in the shorter midterm, where is the best place to put money? It's, again, if it fits within that, 2 to 7 year mark, which is every day I'm having these conversations. I want to buy down, I want to buy a house one day. I want a down payment. The reality is the only vehicle that really fits within that is an investment account. It doesn't mean that you're going to be super aggressive. You're probably going to be balanced between equities and fixed income. But don't keep it in cash if it's beyond 2 years.
We have another question from Marisa that we skipped over. Is there a threshold for how much money you should have saved before you start investing? Or should you just start investing even if your savings aren't what you'd like them to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's relative. If you have $0 in savings, then I would build up your savings before you start to invest, right? But I think that we always want more for the safety and comfort. We want cash. And so we're sometimes afraid to start to invest, the fear of losing dollars or losing a job and not having a cushion. The reality is that if those dollars are in the investment account, now there's different tax consequences around investments. If you when you on by selling the gain or by the gains or selling stock. But the worst case scenario is that if your savings doesn't have to be perfect, because I can promise that you get to the perfect place and then there's another threshold to be perfect with your savings, and you've missed out on time in the market. So even if it's just a little bit, even as you still want to build your savings, you may want to build savings and also be investing, right? Maybe if, for example, if you were putting in $500 a month into savings and you're like, okay, my savings isn't exactly where I want it to be, but I have 4 months versus the 6 months that I would like to have. Maybe you still put money into your savings account, but maybe the whole 500 doesn't need to. Maybe I put 300 and I start to invest and I start to plant the seed at 200. You got to always be thinking that how can I plant the seed for my and be an advocate for my future self today, because every day that you're missing by being in the market, you're costing yourself thousands and thousands of dollars for your future self.
That's all the questions in the chat.
Perfect. So I'm going to pause this and I'm just going to switch and we'll talk more about retirement accounts and how that fits into investing as well. But it was a separate, I'm just going to switch my presentation here. No, it just never works for me. It's just, I pause it, I have to like reshare it. Or unless I'm doing something wrong this whole time for the last year. Okay. When it comes to retirement, again, when we're talking about long-term, I categorize retirement as the fourth bucket, because there's a lot of life that's going to happen prior to retirement, right? So there's maybe reasons why you want to have accessibility to dollars before retirement. But the financial challenges that really face women is, and we have to be thinking, one of the greatest fears and the biggest risks, and the number one thing answer that I always get from people is that I am fearful of outliving my monies, right? It's the number one concern, but yet we are so short-term focused that we don't do the things that we need to do to advocate for our future self and to make sure that the result that we get is that we won't outlive our money. That is, again, one of the biggest fears, and rightfully so for us women, is because we tend to live longer than men. So that's one of the biggest risks that we have in retirement is longevity. It's a blessing and a curse, right? So we have to make sure we're planning for that. It's all women. We saw this at an alarming rate over the last year, is women are taking themselves out of the workforce or decreasing the amount of time that they are in the workforce to help care for children, aging parents, a loved one. We make less than men, right? This isn't the gender gap conversation, but the reality is that we do make less than men. And so if we're taking ourselves out of the workforce, if we're not investing, how we close that gap, right? How do we make sure that our later years, we aren't outliving our money if during our working years, we have all these different challenges? We're also more likely to inherit dollars, money from people, family members, from spouses, because we're living longer. And we have a more, different relationship with risk. So those are the things that we have to be thinking about as we're building out, think in this country, we hear about the 401ks, and we kind of know we need to start to save for this thing called retirement early, because if you're working for an employer that offers it, it's kind of been ingrained in us to be saving in that, investing in that capacity. But the reality is that there's other ways that, sometimes we all have competing financial priorities. It's really about, in this day and age, it's not about or, it's an and. We have to be planting the seeds along the way. It may not always be perfect, but we can't wait to arrive somewhere and then start something. So how do we build out that retirement strategy? First of all, retirement is your longest vacation. It's, we spend so much time. I know the joke, and especially as we're coming out of COVID, the joke is that we spend so much time, we spend more time trying to plan a vacation than anything else. And we think about how to fund it. Again, that's short-term focus. But if you think about retirement could be a 30 to 40-year vacation, would you want to make sure that you are funding that and prepared to fund that? So making sure that you're planning for it, implement thoughtful and strategic actions, because if we're only setting ourselves up for one type of vehicle to be living off of, there's no diversification, and that's exposing us to taxes. That's exposing us to market volatility. So making sure that you're having ongoing reviews and updating your retirement plan. There's 2 phases to retirement. For most of us, right, we're in the accumulation phase. Our goal is to try to accumulate as many dollars as we possibly can, really by the power of compound growth, right? Right now, you have the benefit of earning dollars, making those dollars work for you, and to get to this place where you can live off of those dollars. So you have the accumulation phase, and then we have a distribution phase. Retirement's the longest vacation. During retirement, you become your own employer. Do you want to make sure that you're payrolling yourself a comfortable lifestyle, or do you want to get to the distribution phase and have to be restrictive? There's risks to retirement. Talked about longevity. There's taxes. Taxes is always going to be part of our conversation. I think the number one misconception that I hear is that, oh, I'm in retirement. Once I retire, I won't have to pay taxes. We live in America. The IRS will always have you pay taxes. Uncle Sam will always be part of your life. It's a matter if you want Uncle Sam to be in bed with you or you want him to be a guest knocking at the door. Is market volatility. There's going to be more unexpected market moving events. So we have to be diversified in our assets when it comes to retirement relative to taxes and to market volatility. The other biggest risks is healthcare. If we are living longer, but it's healthcare. It is very expensive healthcare. Medicare covers some things, but you have premiums with Medicare. You have premiums for, there's part A, B, C, and D when it comes to Medicare. You have to enroll, you're automatically enrolled in part A at age 65. You have to basically you're forced to enroll in part B with a premium. And then D is the prescription. There's a lot of costs that are associated with healthcare. So that is also a risk. So everything that we've worked hard for, we don't want to just have to pay for Medicare. We want to have the flexibility and freedom. So where to put your money when it comes to, and this is where I'll take a little bit of a deeper dive and then I'll open it up for questions, is when it comes to retirement, those traditional vehicles we hear all the time, the 401k, traditional IRA, and Roth IRA. So here we have the 401k and the traditional IRA. They sit in their own swim lane. Reason being is that you are making contributions into those vehicles with pre-tax dollars. You didn't pay taxes on it going in. Those dollars, this is where the IRS, this is what's called qualified dollars, because the IRS has rules and regulations and restrictions around it. But the benefit around this is that you're not paying taxes on any of those gains. Power of compound growth. By investing and putting money into your 401k, power of compound growth. That growth is not getting taxed. Think about putting all of those dollars in and never having paid taxes. You get to the distribution phase of your life, the IRS, Uncle Sam's knocking on your door. Not only knocking on your door, but he's crawling into bed with you. Not cute. So what we want to do, the two difference between the 401k and the IRA is that the 401k is an employer-sponsored plan. You can put 19,500 in. That's the maximum that you as an employee can put in. That is independent if you have an employer that is providing matches. You can put in 19,500. If you don't have a 401k or you're working for yourself, you can have what's called an IRA. And those IRAs is a traditional IRA. If you're working, is anyone working for themselves as independent? This is where you can have what's called a SEP IRA or a simple IRA. Those are IRAs that are that are designed for self-employed business owners or business owners. All of those dollars they sit in the same swim lane. They're all pre-tax dollars, so they cause a taxable event in distribution. The number two misconception is that I will be in a lower tax bracket in retirement than I am today. It's wrong. Carol, I see that you have a question, so I will answer that.
I just put it in the chat. So
Okay.
My question is, so when you say that there's the 19, and I forgot the change part of it, 19,800 or the 19,200K that you can put in your 401k, that's pre-tax. I get that. Can you still contribute more than that after you just aren't getting the tax advantage? Or are you just limited? Like that's the most I can put in my 401k in a year?
That's the most that you can put in your 401k from a tax deduction.
Right.
Depending on your plan, and this is going to be different and not to throw it for a loop, if your plan allows you to put in what's called after-tax contributions, yes, you can put after-tax contributions into the account up to 57,000.
Combined.
So combined with your 19,500, your employer contributions, and whatever that difference is that you can actually put in, but your plan has to allow it.
Right. But then you can at least you're still like getting a bigger amount that's going to compound as it grows, right?
Yes.
I mean, you still have that, but then the taxes just gets weirder. Exactly. On the back end. Okay.
Yes, because you're mixing deductible dollars with non-deductible.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I tend to leave it clean, and to help avoid or help to mitigate the taxes is this thing called the Roth IRA. The Roth IRA is you putting in after tax dollars into the vehicle. The money, the power of compound growth, the growth, right? It's not guaranteed that it's every year it's going to grow. It's just more about looking at the average, right? That's why you always want to play the long game, is those dollars that are growing are tax free. So everything that's coming out in distribution is not taxable to you. So it helps to mitigate the taxes that you may have to pay from your traditional IRA or 401k. So for example, let's say we have $1 million, just to keep it simple, $1 million in a 401k, or when we're arriving at $4 million in a 401k and $1 million in a Roth IRA. And our lifestyle in retirement, keep it simple, is, so we have $2 million, $1 million in each, and to keep it simple, our lifestyle is $200,000. We can do, if our lifestyle was $200,000 and we only had the 401k or IRA to distribute from, we're forced to pay whatever that tax rate is. And I can promise you, even if you're not affected by Biden's tax proposals, our tax rates are going up. There's no doubt. Whether it's in this administration, the next administration, it doesn't make a difference. Our tax rates are going up. But in today's tax rate, $200,000 is 24%. If we have $1 million, instead of paying $1 million to 24%, we live off of $200,000. Let's take $100,000 out and get taxed at 12%, and take $100,000 out of a bucket of dollars that I'm not even taxed on. That's the way to be proactive, to make sure that you're in control of what your tax rate is, not just by saying, oh, well, I'm for sure going to be in a lower tax rate when I'm in retirement. How do you know? Because we are traveling later. We are wanting to fund, grandkids, education, or helping children with a down payment. We do not know. We may have mortgages on a second home, right? All of these things, we want to have that flexibility. So we want to make sure that we have both types of dollars. There are restrictions around the Roth IRAs that you can only put $6,000 in. And there's an income eligibility. If you're making over a certain threshold, you actually can't put money into a Roth IRA. The investment piece here that's sitting on this illustration and is the investments that we were just talking about in the previous segment, is investments that are outside of retirement accounts. So there aren't restrictions. You can put as much as you want in. You can put it, whether it's into stocks, bonds, mutual funds, or EFTs, you can put as much in. You can decide how you want to invest, again, relative to your time horizon, risk tolerance, all that. The IRS doesn't have rules and regulations around it. You are taxed on those dollars, on the gains, not the dollars that are going in. Those dollars have already been taxed because you're putting in after tax dollars, but the gains are taxed on a year-to-year basis. So when you're in investments, you're going to get what's called a 1099 that you have to give to your accountant every year. And that's considered income, even if you don't live off of that income, even if you're reinvesting the dividends that the companies are providing. You still have to show that you had some income. So that's where making sure you have tax strategies as part of your accumulation part is important. So I'm going to pause here because it's a lot of information in a very short period of time to answer some questions and just kind of round out the conversation, because I know we could probably talk for hours and hours. So Julie, I hope I answered the difference between the Roth IRA and the Roth. Okay, sorry, the Roth IRA and the Roth 401k. Okay, I will answer that one. But I think I missed some questions here. It was the first one when it comes to. So the difference between the Roth IRA and the Roth 401k is that an IRA is an individual retirement account. So whether it's a traditional or whether it's a Roth IRA, whether it's they all sit, a simple or a SEP IRA, it all sits outside of a 401k. A 401k within your if you are offered a 401k plan through your employer, because again, that's an employer sponsored plan, the 401k is highly regulated by this thing called ERISA. But if within your 401k plan, a lot of plans will allow you to have what's called pre-tax dollars or post-tax dollars. And those post-tax dollars is the Roth 401k. If you're making contributions with post-tax dollars, you're paying taxes up front, so you're not paying taxes on the back end. It's really dependent on your personal situation, which one, a combination or one is better than the other. If you're in a higher tax bracket, you probably want to be putting money into the traditional 401k to help lower the taxes to you today, and probably invest and have strategies outside of the 401k that help you with tax mitigation and efficiencies outside of the 401k. Are all life insurance plans cumulative? No. So there's this thing called life insurance. This is why it's sitting on here, is that a lot of people think about, I don't think I covered this last time, but a lot of people think about life insurance as just as an asset protection, right? To protect your family. And certainly if you are parents, own a home, people financially rely on you, life insurance is important because again, that's a blind spot. But life insurance can also act as an asset. It is also an asset. The reason why it's also an asset is because the tax code around life insurance is tax-free. The death benefit is tax-free. Think about what kind of insult to injury would it be if there was a family, if I died and my sister, who's my beneficiary, and she had to pay taxes on $2 million of my death benefit. If there's a premature death, the reason why people have life insurance is to protect family members from a financial distress compounded by emotional time. What kind of insult to injury would it be if the IRS taxes you on those dollars? The tax, so it's tax-free. Life insurance can act as an asset, and when it's acting as an asset, you can actually build dollars within the life insurance and capitalize on that tax code. It being an asset, the asset that you're building within life insurance is cash, the same type of cash that's sitting in your bank account. Now, when you have that as part of your plan, it's important to do that with a financially strong insurance company. But it sits on the balance sheet. It can sit on your balance sheet as part of your retirement strategy because it's not a Roth IRA, but it has the same characteristics of the Roth. You put in after tax dollars, the dollars grow tax-free, and in distribution, you're not paying taxes on it. For someone starting off, and I'm going to, other than pause for every single person, I know we're running a little over, so I'm just going to switch to this screen and I'll answer the question, is that, no, it's a lot of information over the last 2 weeks, and certainly today as we're taking these deeper dives. I am available for a complimentary, no obligations, everyone's situation is going to be different. So as you're absorbing this, a money clarity call where we can hop on a call and understand what's going on in your world, what are some of your challenges, and I can help provide some tips and strategies to make sure that you can walk away from that phone call with some clarity. So email me. I know some of you emailed me last week about the cash flow sheet. Happy to also go through that as well. Take advantage of this. I promise you there is no pitch at the end. There's no obligation. We will decide if at the end of that call, if I can be helpful and you want to work together, I will provide those options, but there is no obligation. So for someone starting off with a 401k, is there a recommended contribution amount to begin with? Is there an industry standard for matching contributions? No industry standard for matching contributions. It is up to the company. A lot of companies, especially during COVID, they probably eliminated their matching, right, to save some dollars. There is, even if you don't get a match, this is another misconception. Even if you don't get a match within your 401k, you should be contributing into your 401k. You want that compound growth and not be paying taxes on those gains. You just want to be able to grow into making sure that you have diversification, so you're not screwing yourself later on and creating a tax bomb. But if your first step should be investing into the 401k, if you get a match, you should be putting in at least up to the match, because why leave free money on the table? And it's not, it's different than a profit sharing. A profit sharing is really based on a matching contribution is different than the profit sharing. A profit sharing is the company discretionary contribution by the company based on the profits. So they can decide, you know, if we reach a certain threshold of sales or profit, then we're going to contribute X amount into the accounts for the employees. So some may do matching, some may say we're going to do a profit sharing. Well, thank you, Kristen. Your explanation is clear and amazing. Thank you. I appreciate that. I know this is a lot, again, a lot of information. So with a life insurance compared to Roth, if you stop paying the insurance policy, you lose everything, right? But if I stop adding to a Roth, I don't lose that money. Correct. Life insurance, yes. So the life insurance piece is that you don't lose everything. You lose the death benefit. If you were to paying into a life insurance policy and you have cash value, you always have your whatever you've contributed, and you cancel out the policy. Say for you make contributions into the policy for 20 years and you're like, okay, I'm done paying and I don't want to pay anymore. You lose the death benefit, but whatever the cash value was, you get to take that out. So it becomes a vehicle that you could, the idea of the cash inside of a life insurance insurance policy is a living benefit. So the idea is for you in life to be using those dollars. You just have to keep a certain amount within the life insurance for it not to cancel the policy and lose the death benefit. But you certainly can cancel the policy. You just lose the death benefit. Whatever your cash value is, you get a check. The Roth IRA, it's not that you adding Roth, like I want to be careful when I say you won't lose the money in the Roth, because there's no guarantee, because the way I describe those two vehicles, and it doesn't mean that it fits every single person, is that if we were to drive down the PCH, we were going from Santa Monica to Malibu down the PCH, we can have options of cars. We can take a Ferrari. Taking the Ferrari is the Roth IRA, or we can take the Honda Accord. The Honda Accord would be like the life insurance. They both get us to the same destination. One's a lot sexier, but can be more prone to an accident, right? By speeding. The Honda Accord is not as sexy going down the PCH, but it's safe and it's reliable. In our financial world, depending on your situation, you may want to have both types of cars in your garage. Because if it's raining, i.e. the market being volatile, you may not want to take the Ferrari out. You may want to say, I'm going to leave the Ferrari in the garage and I'm going to be safe and take the Honda Accord. So, but because it's a market-based asset, you can lose those dollars, right? That's why you have to be invested appropriately.
There's a question up a little bit that says, is it a good idea to put your 401k money into the house down payment?
No. Now, with that said, is that there's people you can take a loan if there's different thresholds of loans that you can, depending on what's in your 401k, you can take a loan from your 401k. And so depending on your one situation, it may be worth, taking a loan for a down payment, but I would not take any distribution from a 401k before you are 59 and a half, because not only do you pay taxes, if you took $100,000 out of your 401k, you would pay ordinary income tax on that plus a 10% penalty because you're younger than 59 and a half. So you can take a loan, but I ideally don't try to factor in 401k loans for a down payment in the planning that I do.